Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bullpen. All right, in the Bullpen today, we have back again, Quill Robinson, VP of Government Affairs and American Conservation Coalition. How are you, sir?
Doing well, thanks for having me back.
Thanks for being back on the program. Let's chop it up, man. I don't want to presume what you know or believe about corporation and climate. I do remember that you think there's this marriage of deregulation and environmental safety. So I would like you to give us your sentiment as it relates to how companies, corporations would be better environmental stewards if there's no regulation in the market or less.
Well, again, thanks for having me back, Dr. Richey, and looking forward to talking more about this important subject. I think it's important to define what we're going for here. So if we're talking about climate change, which is definitely the biggest environmental issue that we're facing right now, we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and prepare communities for change, right? And we're gonna need a lot of shifts to happen in the economy in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that's gonna require a lot of innovation and new technologies that are gonna help us lower those greenhouse gas emissions. And so my point here when it comes to regulation is there is red tape, there is regulation that currently exists that is getting in the way of those sorts of innovations from happening. And so I'm not saying strip away all regulation. What I am saying is we wanna make it as easy as possible for those innovations that will help us fight this very important issue of climate change, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and get in the direction that we want to go. And I think that that's something that we can probably agree upon because we need more innovations in order to address this issue.
I do agree with the innovation point of view. And let me read something. This is from Harvard Business Review. And it says that the research finds that global emission levels are lower for countries with tighter environmental regulations. They are higher in countries that have looser environmental regulations. That's a real cause and effect reality. What they also found in the research, the data reported by Harvard Business Review, is that many times when there is regulation in the marketplace, some of these companies, some of these corporations will simply go to a foreign country that has less regulation in the market in order to pollute more, for lack of a better phraseology. And what they found is that companies may transfer polluting operations to those countries. The idea behind the data or the conclusion is that these companies increase their polluting activities when there's either an option domestically where there's deregulation or an option internationally where there's a deregulated reality for them. So my question to you is, based on the actual research, and this was published in 2021, very recent study. Based on the behavior of these corporations, what makes you think that if left up to their own will, right? You have more deregulation, it increases or enhances innovation, great, I think that's a good tool. What makes you think this will work, a positive for environmental realities for everybody in this country and beyond, when they don't take advantage of those innovations outside of the United States of America, when they are in a deregulated foreign country?
Sure, well, Dr. Richey, I don't think that we should be exporting jobs to other countries, and I certainly don't think we should be exporting our pollution to other countries. I think we agree on that. But that's going to require creating an economic environment where you both have a reasonable amount of environmental regulation and at the same time are creating the economic conditions for that innovation to happen. There was a report released by C3 Solutions just this year, and they found that free economies are in fact cleaner economies when it comes to the environment. So what do I mean by free economies? Those are places where there are strong property rights, there are strong incentives for innovation, where it's easy to start a business. And in fact, what this report found from C3 Solutions was that the economies that were freer actually were twice as clean as more heavily regulated and top-down, mandate-heavy economies that actually do not spur that sort of innovation. And so there's pretty clear evidence that we actually can do both. And I think that that's the position that the United States should be putting ourselves in, is a place where we can see that innovation, have reasonable regulation, and have both that economic prosperity and environmental sustainability that we're looking for.
You do make a compelling point. Let's talk about how the message continues to permeate, especially among Republicans. because Democrats are on the right side of at least the environmental justice issue, knowing that there's a real cause and effect between what man does and what happens to our environment. You do agree that what we do here impacts the environment around us, right?
Absolutely, and as a conservative, I feel like I have a personal responsibility to make sure that I'm caring for my community and my environment, and that when I have kids in the future, that I'm passing on a world that is healthier. And I think that really comes from my faith, my conservative perspective on the world, and a sense of responsibility. And I think that that's something that actually is very strong if you're talking to folks in rural or red communities, whether they're farmers or hunters or fishermen. They actually think about that a lot, and that's something that is that sentiment is very present in those communities.
Well, Republicans don't think about it enough. So let me give you some more data. And I appreciate what you said, because I've often made the comparison. I say, listen, Christian folks understand the cause and effect relationship between everything but environment. And I never understood that, okay? Reap what you sow. All of these dynamics in the Bible are connected to cause and effect relationships. Then all of a sudden, when it comes to environment, only 22% of Republicans believe that there's a cause and effect relationship between what man does and how the environment responds. Only 22%. That's compared to over 80% of Democrats who are very clear that what we do impacts the environment around us. So let me ask you, because you're on the other side, you're in a different data set. Why has it been so difficult for Republicans to be able to look at the actual science and say, yes, what men and women do to pollute the environment impacts the environment? Why is that a difficult connection?
Sure. Well, Dr. Richey, last time we were speaking, I believe you said it was at 6%. So I'm glad to hear that number is going up. When I'm having conversations, came out
in 2021, the last one was in 2020. So yeah, it is increasing, and I think
absolutely, that number is certainly going up every day. And I think that in my work with the organization I work with, we talk about what conservative solutions to climate change look like. And when I'm talking to Republicans across the country, they're very enthusiastic about that. But I think even more importantly, what's beyond that sentiment, and where do we need to get? We need to be talking about solutions, right? It's not enough just to believe that climate change is happening. We need to figure out what are the best avenues in terms of policy that are actually going to yield the outcomes that we want. And the fact is that 90%, and this is according to a Pew Research Center poll that they conducted last year, 90% of Americans support planting more trees to sequester carbon dioxide. 84% support investing in carbon capture and utilization. 79% support investing in more alternative sources of energy. And so if I'm doing my numbers right, that includes a whole lot of Republicans too.
Yeah, but it doesn't.
So I think that's a pretty encouraging sign.
You're right, brother. It does include a whole lot of Republicans, but let me give you some other data points. 83% of Americans are in favor for tax breaks for utilities. 62% are in favor of taxing companies for their greenhouse gas emissions. So once again, this is the majority sentiment of the nation. But when you break that data out and look at conservative versus everyone else, Republicans are once again in the minority. They do not represent the majority of the respondents as it relates to that sentiment. And let me go back to Republican leadership. And the only reason why I'm bringing this to your attention is because I want to see you all move in this direction. But what I don't want to see is some massive compromise and some hand in glove scenario where really corporations are dictating what environmental justice should look like, rather than those who actually really give a damn about environmental justice and not just a bottom line. Corporations care about the bottom line. So let's go to Republican leadership. Pollution concentrations tend to be 10% higher under Republican governors in the United States of America. That's based on actual codified data, okay? 37% higher under Republican presidents and Republicans in charge of the Congress. That's based on what's called the average pollution concentration count. That's a data set that was calculated 2 years ago. And it was massive because it went all the way back to the late 90s. So the question is, brother, I get what you're saying, man. I understand what you're selling, all right? And I'm buying some of it, but I can't buy all of it. And the reason is because you continue to say that you have to have a free market for this to work, which says unregulated. I just don't see the connection given the historical dynamics that we see clearly in front of us, given the leadership dynamic of how Republicans actually oversee the largest increase in these harmful emissions, and the fact that corporations have not engaged in the innovation that you're talking about, even when they are in a country that is basically deregulated as it relates to environmental safety. So what you're saying they're not doing, are we saying that magically they're going to start doing it if the red tape or the regulation starts to lessen for these corporations?
I think if you asked any business owner or someone who's trying to start a business right now, if we live in a deregulated economy, I think that they would probably disagree with you. But again, that's not what I'm arguing for here. I'm not saying that we need to strip away all regulation. I'm saying we should look at places, look at areas where it's actually inhibiting us from getting to the goals that we want. I'll give you a specific example. We're in the middle of infrastructure negotiations right now, and you and I could probably have a longer argument about what that price tag should be and where that money should go. But I want to point to something specific in this infrastructure conversation to illustrate what I'm trying to say about red tape. There's this thing called the National Environmental Policy Act that was created to protect the environment. I think that that's a good thing. Essentially, what it means is that for large federal projects, there's a process of reviewing the environmental impact of those projects. The fact is that it takes on average to go through a NEPA review 4.5 years, and it costs well over $4 million. And so, bringing this into current day events and what we're facing right now is we're talking about how we can invest in infrastructure in order to address climate change. Having that sort of red tape, and I'm not saying strip all of it away, I'm saying how can we make that more efficient? Because I think climate change is too serious for these projects to be caught up and delayed for years, and for millions of dollars to be going to lawyers rather than the infrastructure projects that we actually need. So that's a specific example. And I think broadly when it comes to Republicans, look, you had the highest ranking Republican in the House of Representatives come out with a climate platform this year. The sentiment has shifted. We're proposing our own solutions and having that debate, and you don't necessarily have to buy all the things that I'm selling. But I think that we're at a different place than where we were even a year ago, and that's being driven by young conservatives who think that we can balance economic and environmental goods, and that we need to address climate change in a smart way. So I see that trend line going in the right direction.
Yeah, I see it going in the right direction. I would not credit young conservatives for all of it. I think activists in general who are environmental activists definitely bring awareness to the topic.
And I count myself among them. I count myself as an environmental activist.
Yeah, and I count you as one as well. I never said that we live in a deregulated economy. I'm referring to foreign nations that are de facto deregulated environments, and these corporations are able to produce, to manufacture, but they have not created the innovation that you're talking about because they are still in the business of creating profit, not creating environmental safety for everybody, but profit. Now, regulation does, based on the data, decrease the harmful emissions that we're talking about. You can't get around that. But I do think that there's room here, brother. I really do. At some point, it has to tilt though, right? Because you can highlight the few members of Congress in the Republican Party who are giving light to this. You can highlight what you're doing in the Republican Party. You don't represent the majority, brother. You don't represent the majority of your party. You represent a minority. Even the leaders who put this on their platform as a hardcore dynamic that they want to push. Remember, the vast majority of those that vote for them do not believe in man-made climate dynamics, meaning men, women cannot impact the environment. Don't you think that's partly because of the massive misinformation that Republicans and conservative pundits have pushed in the anti-science realm as it relates to the environment? It has now become, it's come home to roost, so to speak.
Well, I would actually push back on that a bit. The second largest caucus in the House of Representatives, so essentially an interest group where members of Congress come together and discuss a particular issue, is the Conservative Climate Caucus. It has well over 60 members. And if you look at the polling, or actually if you go out and you ask a conservative, the folks that I'm friends with and work with, if they think that humans have an impact on the environment, they'll say yes. Confidently so, and many of them who live in rural communities, and their income and their livelihoods depend on the health of the environment around them, are very much interested in protecting the environment. And in Congress, we've been working on tons of different pieces of legislation that have in fact been led by Republicans. Yeah. And so I think you're talking about something that may have been the case several years ago, but that's just simply not the reality.
No, sir, that's not true. This data comes from, excuse me, 2021, not several years ago. Only 22% of current Republicans believe that man-made environmental issues are real. They believe in environmental issues. They just think it comes from volcanoes and the natural flow of the planet, right? So they believe in that. They just don't believe that man can contribute to it or can stop it one way or the other. That is adversarial to the message that you're preaching. And don't you think the reason why only 22% of Republicans believe in what you're doing or what you're saying is because you all had massive misinformation at some point, right?
Dr. Richey, we can sit here and argue about poll numbers all day long, but frankly, I take climate change too seriously to be focusing on that. And I think that it's really important that we're holding members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, to account and making sure that they're voting the right way on bills that will result in lower greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
Continuing to encourage the companies that many of them have set ambitious climate goals and are developing innovative technologies to lower greenhouse gas emissions. Continue to encourage that. And so, we can sit here and argue about this all day long and name and shame Republicans, or we can get to work. And that's what I'm focused on. I think that it's too important of an issue.
Let me tell you what you need to get to working on, because once again, cause and effect, right? We're talking about politics. If the vast majority of your party, if they don't believe in the product you're selling, that's why this poll is important. This poll is connected to a person. That person voted in a respondent survey. This is not just a poll, these are people that actually responded across the United States of America inside of your political party. If you cannot get at least sentiment from the voters in the Republican Party, you all would never have the political cover in order to execute the kind of environmental strategy you're talking about. So those numbers are just as important as the 60 people in that caucus, because part of the game of politics is influence and persuasion. And if you're unable to influence your political core, your party, as to what is right, what is proper, and what is appropriate, you will never have the political backing to do it. And look at who you got in the Congress, brother. They're never going to go contrary to the political sentiment of their voters. So you have to educate them as to what's really happening around the world as it relates to environment.
Sure, I think you make a great point. And I think that the reason that you actually had more Republicans voting for the Growing Climate Solutions Act this summer, 92-8 vote, you had more Republicans than Democrats voting yes on it, is because they understand that their constituents want farmers to be adopting more sustainable practices that'll help fight climate change. That's why it passed 92-8, and that's why you had more Republicans voting for it than Democrats. Their constituents want serious solutions that'll actually yield economic and environmental benefits. That's the same reason that Republicans were at the table and played a crucial role in passing the Energy Act of 2020, which invested in carbon capture and nuclear and battery storage and all these other technologies which are lowering greenhouse gas emissions. And again, back to the polling I referenced earlier, vast majority of Americans want those things. Republicans are delivering on that, and that's encouraging to me. I think that we need progress.
Man, the bills that you're talking about are bipartisan.
Absolutely
bipartisan.
Absolutely,
you can't say that Republicans are the ones delivering. But listen, man, I'm running out of time. But I appreciate you being on the show. Thank you for always coming on the Bullpen.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.